Here to talk about nonprofits doing good for games. I want to introduce your panel briefly. So first we've got Gordon Bellamy, the CEO of Gay Gaming Professionals. He is also an instructor at USC Games,
Yep.
The head of the Bridge incubator there, and the esports faculty advisor.
Yeah.
Gordon has played many roles in business in the gaming industry, including Tencent, Electronic Arts, Madden NFL, which I just learned about, and at MTV. He sits on the board of directors for TheWaveVR, and has been executive director for both the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences and the International Game Developers Association, who are both also represented here. Susan Gold is the founder and interim director at the Global Game Jam. She's an American scholar with 20-year academic career in positive social impact. She created the Global Game Jam, a hackathon for games that's transformed the lives of game developers in 113 countries. She wants to leverage the connectivity that digital games provide us to influence and benefit people around the world. And just to show you where some of the Global Game Jam events have occurred, I couldn't zoom in any further to get this, but you can see literally hundreds of events all over the world.
It's pretty awesome.
Megan Scavio?
Scavio,
sorry. Academy of Interactive, I said it right like 10 times. Arts and Sciences Foundation. As the president of that, she promotes and advances and recognizes the outstanding achievements of the interactive entertainment industry worldwide through the D.I.C.E. Summit, the industry's premier gathering of creative and business leaders, the D.I.C.E. Awards Show, which, are you allowed to say the Academy Awards of Games? Like, it really is. But
we like to think it is.
You'd like to think, all right. The European D.I.C.E. Europe Conference, and also in the reason for her appearance here, the AIAS Foundation. She's previously spent 18 years at UBM, where she was the general manager of the Game Developers Conference. You guys may have heard of that at some point, for 8 years. And I am Lucian Parsons. I am the director of Maverick, which is the Mixed Augmented Virtual Reality Innovation Center at the University of Maryland, where we try to promote the use of XR and across multiple industries. I am the board chair for the International Game Developers Association, and currently its interim executive director while we find a new executive director. And I am here also to at least somewhat represent the IGDA Foundation, which is a separate organization but closely related in our work within the gaming industry. So, without further ado, and I'll just leave this up for anybody who wants to get more information about our organizations, I will ask each of us to talk about what we do and why we do it in the industry. Megan?
Yeah, so I was with GDC for 18 years, and so I got to see the game industry from a completely different perspective. The number one problem that we always faced were getting underrepresented developers on stage and getting them in the room. So a few years ago, I set forth to really kind of change and normalize the industry and show that this community is made up of every type of person, not just, no offense to the straight white guys in the room, but straight white guys. So when I had the opportunity to come run the academy, it was positioned as a way to not only grow the industry, but run a foundation. And that was something that was really near and dear to my heart, and finding a way to give back. So what we really focus on, and I think most foundations should kind of pick their lane, but we focus on early to mid-career developers and helping promote their careers. So the main program that we run is called Amplify New Voices. And it's a program that takes place the day before GDC. We accept 36 applicants. We get about 150. They're all from underrepresented developers. They're working 5+ years in the industry, having shipped a game, and we give them professional training. So we help them rewrite their bios. We give them professional headshots. We do on-camera media training and on-camera speaker training. Gordon has been a coach for a couple of years, so can speak to how much it empowers the developers and gives them a sense of like ownership and gives them an opportunity to go out there and talk about what they do for a living instead of being a woman or an LGBTQ person or a person of color. It gives them a chance to speak up, and that's kind of what my goal is to help that community.
Awesome. So me, why? So it's a matter of a purpose. I love helping people get from point A to point B who want more. That's why I teach and why I do this. I think specifically as a narrative, I spent the first 7 years of my career closeted. And super bro, I was designing Madden football and living that life, but not as my sort of self-valuing self. And for the first maybe 12 or 13 years of my career, our industry was closeted to each other. We existed as an anonymous mailing list, anonymous to each other, because of the sort of fear we had of being fired, exposed, whatever that meant, right? That's core sort of self-esteem issue before we began to speak, create, program. And even now, a lot of people are afraid, I don't know if you read, like a lot of people are afraid to hold hands, right? Which is a great metaphor for how you feel about being yourself in our workplace, no matter how good you are at what you do, like before you get a chance to even do that. So about 14 years ago, thanks to GDC, we used to have at least a meeting once a year for an hour where we'd all share our pain. And I was like, we should be out to each other. Let's go to a bar, right? Let's just go see each other's faces. And with the advent of Facebook, we began to talk all year round and see each other's faces all year round and build a community and an intention of supporting each other and our evolving identity as queer and allies and all those things year round. And now we do events at all the major conferences where we come together, huge events, and now we have corporate partnerships to exist, and now we have very public facing things, and now we have academic scholarships where being queer can be an affirmative trait, where people are getting cash money for doing community service in the queer community, as well as studying our game craft. And hopefully creating a world where young people won't remember before they had, events, scholarships, access to opportunity. That's what I do, why we do it.
Hi, so I'm Susan Gold from the Global Game Jam, and I started as a professor teaching game design. And one of the things that I encountered at the time was that students never made a game from start to finish in the early 2000s. Like, it just was unheard of. Maybe they would work on a level, they would just learn encoding. There were no real game engines. There was Unreal, but you had to be a C++ coder. It was very difficult. And I went to a conference to look at some people that had made games and talk to other academics, etc. And they were showing off games that were made at the Nordic Game Jam. And I was like, what's this game jam? They're like, oh, all these people get together and they make a game over the course of 48 hours. So the games were hysterical. I loved the games. They were innovative. I hadn't seen anything like it. And so I started talking to those people and I said, what if we did this around the world simultaneously, right? And everybody worked off the same theme. And they looked at me like I was on drugs. Like, how are we going to communicate with all those people? How are we going to meet all those people? But there were organizations like the IGDA. I'm sorry, IGDA.
Yeah,
You're IGDA,
all good. It's all good.
There were the IGDA, and I was a part of the special interest in education. And I just started talking about it, and it spread. So our first year, we held a game jam. It was at the end of January. It was Super Bowl weekend. I thought nobody would participate. But we had 3,000 some odd people participate, and it was considered a tremendous success. And then the next year, it was 8,000. The next year, it was 15,000. This year was 49,000 people participating in 113 countries. And what we've done is we've put together an event that we just give you the structure. We tell you what, when you're gonna do it. So we pick the weekend. We tell you, this is the theme, this is your keynote. You start at 5 o'clock at your time zone, right? And that's pretty much it. But then as we grew, we had to accommodate for things like people that had holidays that were, or like the Sabbath, so we would have to accommodate. So for some people, we would, not do Fridays and Saturdays. We did Thursday and Sunday, and Wednesday night, Thursday, Sunday, because that was, what needed in their environment. But what happened was that we all kind of became jammers together. And as this organization started to grow, we realized the things that we were doing where we were providing opportunities where there were none. I went to visit Peru one year, and they said, well, we'd like you to address, the conference. And I said, okay. And so when they picked me up, they said, oh, you'll go to the Congress. And I assumed Congress and conference were the same thing. I was wrong. I was going to Congress. So I had to speak into the entire Peruvian Congress, and it was crazy because I was sweating profusely, etc. But the reason why they wanted me there was the Global Game Jam itself had created its own economic base. Like, it was now something that people in Peru did. Like, the year before, they had never done that kind of thing, and now they were having Peruvian game studios. They wanted to know more about it. So, like, the fact that we started to not only provide opportunities, but we were changing economies, that was an amazing thing to me, and that was opening doors and providing opportunities for people that never thought they could dream of having a job like a game designer. So it was super exciting. And that growth has provided opportunities for us to start a new event for kids. So we have GGJ Next, which is a kids game jam. So no overnights, people have been looked at and had a background check, because I don't want anybody's kid to disappear. But we had, we started to grow that way. We started scholarships to bring people to things like GDC. And Megan was one of the first people that allowed us to approach and say, yeah, that would be a great idea to provide, people that can't get to GDC ordinarily an opportunity. So subsequently, we have asked every conference, even Games for Change, to provide scholarships for us so we can get more people to attend these events. And our hope for and our growth is that we continue to provide opportunity for game developers all over the world. So that's the Global Game Jam.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like something we share, right? Like, everyone's trying to provide access.
Yeah.
And whether that be across your geographic identity or your identity, socioeconomic identity, whether it be like opening those doors so people can start, is like a big challenge we all share.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the IGDA Foundation, actually, even before it was formed, the IGDA Scholars Program had started, which was getting a group of industry experts together and picking the best and the brightest out of the students who were studying or who were working on this. And that started in 2001. Robin Huneke was one of the early ones. Scott John Siegel, Whitney Hills were all IGDA scholars. And part of that was getting, again, people access to GDC, because that's how I got my own career started, was buying a ticket and going to GDC on my own dime and walking around and saying to people, hi, I'm an MBA student and I have no idea what I'm doing, except I'd love to get into this industry. Can you have any advice for me? But if you don't have the opportunity, I had the means to do that. And if you don't have that, then we have to come up with other ways. And so the foundation does that, as well as a couple of other programs we might get into as well. But what we did discover, and the point that Gordon just made, was, we're all focused on, in one way or another, spreading the industry, right? Increasing diversity. because 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whenever it was that we started in the industry, there was not much diversity at all, and a lot of the games looked the same, and a lot of the and we didn't have the platforms, right? This didn't exist yet, so it was hard to break into the industry because you needed to be a AAA developer. Well, how many jobs are there in that? Not nearly enough, right, for everybody.
Indie was not.
There was no such thing as indie, right? Because the minimum amount you needed to spend on a game was way over what anybody could do. So as we talked about this, it was like, well, wait a minute, why all four of us are doing kind of diversity things? Why are we doing that? Why shouldn't there be one group that does that? And I think, we each have different answers to that. But Gordon, yours is maybe the most interesting case where you started something where you weren't even like out to each other, right? Sure. What kind of what impact have you seen from that? Or I don't know.
Well, I just go back to your point. I think there's an inherent danger to any one group being in charge of diversity.
Yeah. Well,
lest you not be whatever that may be. It seems like a formula wrought with opinion.
Not a diversity.
Yeah. But I think for us, the opportunity to be default is something that we really work on. It's sort of like the common thread through what we do. And if you've ever not felt default, right? And by that I mean where people have opinions that affect your ability to impact before you talk, right? That's a really palpable experience. And I know for me, I had the good fortune, I went to Harvard, I designed Madden, blah, 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 right? So there's things that I do to get to default. So then people will now hear the important things I have to say. But before that happens, that's not the usual narrative. And not everyone in our queer community has those affordances, right? There's a lot of aren't you lucky to be tolerated, right? Despite whatever your talent may be, forget that, aren't you lucky that we're going to give you a moment or a month or a day or a flag or a something, right, before you get to participate. And so it is really important to me, my own identity, who spent a lot of energy in these different organizations, helping a broader set of people to specifically identify an audience of which I'm a part and be like, it's your time. You get all my Cyclops powers, right? To simply be default and to express yourself in all the different ways that exist, whether that be in game creation and now as much in the discourse around games. So there's lots of clubs and gamers and streamers and people who may not be hands-on pekka, but are very much a part of what games mean going forward now that I just love them being empowered to start from the same point that everyone else does to do what they want to do.
That's fantastic. And
No, I agree. I agree with everything you said. I think we all have the same goal of trying to create an even playing field. And that's all we try to do. And as someone who has had to talk to every nonprofit in the video game industry individually, when I was with GDC, when I was able to break free of that, all I wanted to do was gather everyone together and try to figure out how we could work together, how we could not overlap our efforts, how we could maybe create paths and work together to solve all the problems,
Yes.
to help everyone in different ways, which I think is what we've started to do, and I'm curious how we can continue to do this. We've already been chatting in preparation for this panel and come up with some really good ideas, I think. But I do like the idea of having somebody who's sort of responsible for tracking and helping, and we tried to do that with one organization one time after Gamergate. There was a secret organization called DIG, Diversity in Games.
Well, okay, learning.
And it was represented by the entire video game community.
Okay.
people from all major studios and publishers were a part of this, and I was really hoping that's where. Now you're looking at me like, what?
I am real talk. Real talk.
Amplifying Voices actually came out of that. But we were
Which is awesome.
I was hoping that that would be sort of like an entity that could speak on behalf of publishers and studios. Because often the case is that they don't want to say anything for fear of repercussions from their audience, right? So we need a body that can speak on behalf of people. That's not necessarily the ESA, which represents publishers, and maybe not necessarily the Academy or the IGDA.
It took leadership. Just to talk about. I'm going to talk about you for a second, right? Twofold. Everyone's familiar with what Game Developers Conference is. Raise your hand if you know what GDC is. Awesome. Raise your hand if you don't know. That's okay. It's all cool. This is the time, right? So it's the largest gathering of developers in the world. It's in San Francisco every year. Everyone sort of called off the top.
Years.
Yeah, 30-some year, but basically sort of now called off the top, like the top 1% of developers are able to come together, right, in their craft and at least connect. And what Megan did was something at least twofold. One was the code of conduct, which is how we're going to treat each other. And I'll let you just talk about that. But also the scholarships, where everyone was able to come from far and wide, and for the first time, have someone who was running the show go, I hear you. I've got solutions to that. Right? You don't have to explain to me exactly why. Like, I already know that you're of value, and I'm going to treat you like you're of value from the start. But I'm going to pass it back to you to talk about.
Well, I mean, it was what I was saying at the beginning. I really wanted to see better representation at the biggest gathering of game developers in the world. Like, it needs to represent who we are, and it's very expensive, and I recognize that. And it's a publicly traded company, and we have to make money, and it's in San Francisco, so it's crazy expensive and hard to get to. I can't even afford to go now that I live in LA. So I wanted to just start getting passes out there. So I didn't feel like it should be my responsibility to select who gets a pass. So what I did, in the end I kind of did anyway, but I scoured the internet and I found as many nonprofits as I could that sort of represented diverse people in the industry. And I called them, or I emailed them, and I said, can I give you a bunch of passes for free to give to your audience? I'm not going to ask any questions. I don't care how you do it. Just here are passes. These two experience that.
And here's trust.
And here's trust. And we put it in the community's hands to send people, and it's really worked out great. We give about 500 at least.
Well, that's for like a global org like you, it must be.
Yeah. So for us, I was able to bring in people from Tunisia, or from, so like in Tunisia, the monthly salary is $250 for a game developer. How in God's name are you going to afford a $1,500, $1,900 pass when that's like your yearly salary? So it becomes an opportunity for people. But then we ran into other problems, which would be our government and visas, and not being able to bring people in. I lost 10 people this year because they couldn't get a visa to come to the United States. So that is becoming more and more problematic when you're working on a global level. But hopefully things will change. I think everyone.
Well, I find it interesting too. There's the whole new game conference that's online only.
The Rami Espanol.
Rami
Does everyone know about that? Does everyone know in the world?
GameDev.world.
What's it called officially?
Game Dev World?
GameDev.world. And so
Okay.
I'm working with Rami on that, and we have a speaker as a part of it. It's very interesting. You can watch it. It's a 24-hour conference, and then they flip it, and so they record it and flip it so you can watch it if you miss backwards if you miss the time zone. So
They also translate
Oh, reverse
they
it.
also
Okay,
translate
serpentine
it
schedule.
into-
You got
and
it.
they're
You got
translated
it.
into 9 languages, so everybody should be able to understand it around the world.
Accessibility.
Accessibility,
yeah.
And I asked the question, why are we all doing this in very tongue-in-cheek? Because the foundation provides 50 scholars velocity and next gen passes to GDC. You said you had 30 something this year. How many?
Oh, I don't work there anymore.
Right.
So I don't know.
And with 150 applicants.
For Amplifying New Voices, yes.
Yeah, for
36.
amplifying new
36, yeah.
voices. And out of the 100 or so that we're doing, we get 500 to 800 applicants. So it feels like, oh, we're making some progress, but at the same time, it's like there's so much more demand than there is availability still, so it's still a big problem, and I think we're still definitely working on that.
Well, it's like Peru.
Susan's very open, access events makes a huge difference, I think. But there's still this lack of default.
Well, funding is probably an issue for everybody here.
Yep.
So I would love to expand beyond 36 people, but we also give them travel stipends of $1,000 each, so it gets quite expensive. Because that was the number one problem for people getting the free passes to GDC. That's like, great, but I still can't get to San Francisco.
Yeah. And take time off from
and
my
taking time
job and
off,
all
yeah.
the things, yeah.
Yeah, this year we are trying to do that as a part of our sponsorship program, that you can, if you sponsor the Global Game Jam, you can also sponsor a person to go to GDC.
Oh.
So we're having that so that we can afford to pay for them to have the travel stipend, but also the cost of a visa. So do you guys remember Lual from the...
He's here.
He's
here. Yeah, the
Okay,
show.
so-
His Kickstarter launched today. Salam. Support the Kickstarter.
Okay, so Lual, he had to travel over 100 miles to get his visa, and so we had raised money for him to come to GDC, but even though, so he went the 100 miles to get the visa, and then they said you have to come back, so he had to go home and then come back, so that was very expensive, and then the cost of the visa was very expensive, and then they denied him. So like that was his first attempt to try to come to GDC, and it was, the cost of the visa, I forgot, because we're American with an American passport. The most I usually pay, I think Brazil is $100. It's nothing, and $100 to me compared to someone in South Sudan is tremendous, So even getting a visa to come to the United States is expensive, and that's why Global Game Jam is also, has passes for GamesCon, has passes for Reboot, has passes for Games for Change, so that we're trying to provide opportunities to...
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
So how do you find the people
With the
who
pockets?
can benefit from your not the
Oh.
people with the pocket, but the people who can benefit from your programs?
Star Trek. It's like Star Trek, right? Like you have the Federation, and if they haven't worked it, no, they do. They'll find it. Like people find their way to the jams, but not everyone finds their way. But the people who, you're right, the Peruvians who wanted it, were like, we're there for it. I think the same thing with us, like people.
Social media.
Social media nowadays,
Word of mouth.
Discord,
Pass it
Insta,
around.
yeah,
Yes.
and with trust, communities of trust.
So Twitter, Facebook, wherever we post it, and then we have an application you have to fill out. And and the people that don't bother to even put a sentence together, those people don't get the passes, you have to I don't know how complicated yours is.
You have to write a couple essays.
But usually there's someone who's the person in between the person who's like, spend the time to make this effort. You know what I mean? There's definitely ambassadors and evangelists in all our communities who are like, trust it, you should try to do this.
We try to keep Amplifying New Voices graduates, we call them, engaged after the event so that they can become ambassadors, and then we invite one of them to come back and keynote and do opening remarks and talk about how the program sort of inspired them or changed their life, and it's that kind of sentiment that just that overflows once you've been doing it for a while.
And the foundation has their alumni come back all the time.
Absolutely.
So that's really integral, and they played the mentors at that time.
And so I think there's a reinforcement loop here, certainly.
Yes.
But when you're completely shocked that the Peruvian government is interested because this thing has exploded overnight, how did that first person in Peru find out about it, right? Or how do we reach the people who haven't necessarily even considered that this could be a thing? Because there's still at Maverick, part of our mission is also to expand the pool of people coming into immersive media. And a lot of the groups I talk to every middle schools, high schools, they don't even consider this a possible job path because they've never heard of anybody doing it, right? And immersive's kind of the next thing. I think game development has more of a reputation at this point, or certainly people like have the idea that this is a thing, but how do you reach the person who doesn't yet know?
Well, at least for me, there's like a narrative journey. I'll teach you for a second, right? And I'll use Global Game Jam as an example in my mind. So there's a narrative journey which is like discovery, right? Then there's experience, like I actually went to a jam and did one. Then there's the next stage, which is actually identity. I am a jammer. You know what I mean? Like, what do you do? Oh, one of the things I do, I'm a jammer. And then there's sharing. And us, sort of top down, have to decide how much of our energy we're gonna focus on discovery, like new people going to jams, the actual experience, who people have already signed up and trust us, our core people who identify as jammers, and then the sharing energy, which is what you're sort of talking about. And that's one of the things which, I mean, there's only so much Susan, so much Megan, that we always have to sort of slide our slider bar between those. And that's always an ongoing question for me, like how much is discovery, how much is just supporting the people who are already leading stuff?
We also have no lack of people applying.
Yeah, well, no, that's the discovery.
So for us, discovery, or for me, discovery is the most exciting part. I personally think is because, so like, let's say I write an email, and for years I would write emails to professors in Cuba that had math programs, computer science programs, art programs, whatever. I would try to get whatever information I could, and I would send these emails, and I felt like they were just going into a void, right? I never heard anything back. Things changed. All of a sudden, Cuba is a huge location for us now. I mean, who would have thought it? But it was, one person from Cuba happened to be in Spain and went to the game jam in Spain. Yeah. And so that person came back and said, we have to do the global game jam. So it was nothing to do with my emails, but they were like, oh, and then the professor said, oh, the lady that's been sending me the emails, I know who that, and it came together, right? But honestly, it was somebody had to have that experience. And I think that's what happens. It's like your friend gets a scholarship and you're like, why couldn't that have been me? Or why didn't I apply? It is about like one person kind of sets off the chain for an entire group.
We also allow nominations, so if you work with someone or you have a friend who you think would be right for this, you can go and nominate them for a slot. Yeah,
we've our first ever scholars this year, so I'm excited to copy everything. So just keep going. I'm like, and then what happens?
Yeah, definitely have applications, that's for sure. The other thing that I was going to say that we also try to do is we try to have meetups at locations. So when I was at Reboot, the people that had Reboot passes all came to lunch with me and talked. They had never had an opportunity to meet me. And they would have never met me otherwise, but they were site organizers. So then they went off from lunch talking to me, super excited about Global Game Jam, and started talking to Bosnians and people from Kosovo, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna have more Global Game Jams. So it just keeps the snowball going, it gets bigger and bigger.
I mean, constantly talking about your foundation and your nonprofit is the way to go. Just never stop talking about it everywhere you go. It's bound to pay off somehow.
Yeah, like I know, like for us, so we throw a party at GDC that's pretty lit. And before the super lit party, we have a tea party for the transgender and non-gender conforming community.
Yes.
And where we're aggregating a community that's super hyper underserved to be, right? And
they love that too because it's not an alcohol driven event.
Nope.
It's
a vibe, it's a mood. And what comes out of that, who knows, but just part of our joy, right? It doesn't matter what games get made in Peru, like you're making games in Peru, right? It's awesome.
You just want to make people feel welcome wherever they are, period.
Absolutely, as they are.
Yes.
So we could probably talk for a while longer, but I want to make sure that we have time to answer questions as well. If anybody has questions, then they can be general or very specific. Or there's a hand right there.
How do you find people with pockets?
No, it's great.
I mean, for me, I'm lucky enough to have been in the industry for a long time, so I know people, but getting out and going to events. Almost every major company has a diversity and inclusion. It depends on where you're looking for the dollars, really. But if it's about representation, almost every major company has a diversity and inclusion department with funding. So I try to find those people. Again, I just talk about the cool stuff that we do with a lot of enthusiasm because it does make me very excited. And you'd be surprised at how many people, I'll just tweet something and someone will see the tweet and they'll be like, I got a call from Google. This is not a joke. I got a call from Google who's like, oh, I saw you tweet about something. I'd like to know more. So always be promoting what you're doing. That's really the only thing that I can do. And then you can email me and I can introduce you to people.
I would say also there's relationships. So we're both 20, 25 years in. And so there's times when you have to give and there's times when you have to ask. And it sort of comes back to roost that if you had it, I used to run a business for Tencent. It was all about give.
Yeah.
And so if you gave then you're more comfortable asking. The very same people who are, the business cards all change over time, but the temperament doesn't. And so sometimes you're asking the same person who was asking you 5 years ago for something.
Absolutely.
Right? And if you were funky then, they'll be funky now. If you were good then,
Always
you have the opportunity.
Be nice to everyone.
And I would say the most important thing you can do is meet the people in this room, right? They've already self-selected, even though you don't know what they do right now, but they've self-selected to be going down this path with you. And there's probably no one more likely on earth than someone who found their way to this basement to help you when they have an extra grand or an extra 2,500 or an extra pass to whatever.
That's right.
Right? And connect on the Twitters or connect up there rather than try to rediscover who was already in this room right now. This is where you start to find the money because sometimes someone else might know where the money is that they can't even get to, but it's the exact money that you need. No, real talk, right?
Absolutely.
Real talk.
Well, just earlier today, we were sitting around talking about, oh, you should try the American Express Leadership Foundation. They have so we try to exchange with each other as well, because who gives to me, it might be the same people that give to Megan, but they're not counting oh, I can only give 3 eggs away, I'm giving them all to Megan. They're like, oh, here's 3 eggs, we'll give one to each, or whatever.
Yeah.
But the thing is, though, that usually people have it's to know when to hit them. So always hit them before the beginning of their fiscal year. That's so they know to budget money in.
Fair.
That's a really important thing.
Or they can spend the last bit of last year's budget before it gets taken
And
back.
then the other thing is to work the room. All of us have spent the last 20 years working the room. I mean, people laugh when they say,
I'm so tired.
I'm small talk, I am so over it. But you smile and you do it and you listen and there's loud music and you have no idea what they're saying, but you're like, yeah, give me your card, and you hope that they remember your conversation. But it really is. People say, we know everybody. I mean, we probably know everybody. We don't remember that we know everybody because we're
Well, I think it's super interesting. 2 things, which is one, find people who see your success as their success, right? So if you don't write us, error of omission, because we all vibe, it's from Games for Change, right? So we're already rooting for you. But 2, we also don't know all the young, the super young, hyper amazing people that you might be very authentic, 100%. We vibe, we play Smash together, whatever you do, right? Whatever they do together, right?
It's definitely Smash.
It's definitely Smash. Okay, sorry, whatever it may be, right? And for us, that's super awesome and motivating to. You ask the first question, we're all who is that? What are they raising? Right? in a very positive way. I would continue that discourse and not be alone. One of the hardest things is to be alone. Right? In the success and failures, in the calls, we were just having a conversation where thought we were alone, but we were in the same exact boat, rowing the same direction, right? In a situation, and it just feels better to be let me keep fighting forward.
But also really hone your pitch.
Yeah.
And what makes you excited about the thing that you're doing, and you have to make them excited, and you have to make them care, and you have to make them want to get involved. So and trust. Because no one wants their stuff to blow up now. That's the worst thing, to get fired over some nonsense because you didn't. You worked with someone who you couldn't trust, and then
I think all of us are very protective, right? You're very protective of the Global Game Jam and who you let be actually attached to it.
It's true, but and also like I wouldn't take money from some people. That's also true. I mean, all money is green, yes, but there is some.
Always equal.
It's not you sometimes I'll just be honest. Like we pitched for the World Expo in Dubai.
Oh, Dubai.
And I gotta tell you, there's like, ooh, exciting Dubai money, and then there's politics, like, and then you're like, how do I weigh that? And you have to decide, would I take money from North Korea? Like
I'll raise my hand on behalf of politics. It's actually not politics with Dubai. It's actually your identity, ability to exist and navigate Earth, which is different than like voting rights or like, like who's gonna pave the road, which is more like politics. Like you have to make choices, like ethical choices about who you are, right? And who you want to be and who you're gonna trust with whatever you're giving for the money, right? If you give Global Game Jam for $10,000, but you've given it away to someone who isn't gonna treat it the way you treat it, that's expensive money.
That's expensive money. Yeah.
And I, for my own part, and people who meet me recently probably don't believe this, but I'm an introvert by nature, and so that first GDC was really, really hard to walk up to people and say, hi, you don't know me, but here's who I am, here's what I'm doing, and I had a pitch, and the pitch got better over the 4 or 5 days there, but it was really a struggle, and it is constantly a struggle. But when I took the chairman position and got fortunate enough to do the executive director role as well, on top of it, I set myself a goal of being told no 100 times this year. And in order to get told no 100 times, I need to ask at least 100 people for money, right? So I just keep asking. And what you very, very rarely do I get the flat no, right? It's usually my budget's out to this year. Okay, great, I'll call you next year, right? Or I'll call you in 3 months.
Yeah.
When
That's
should
a win,
Yes,
right?
Find out.
Or I don't have any, but so-and-so might. Let me do an introduction, right? So there's that, but it all starts with that initial ask, and it's usually not the person you already know. It's the person you know who knows somebody who might know somebody who gets you there.
You also raised was interesting was diversity of communication style, right?
Okay.
And that there's a vibe. Like I'm very high approach. Like I'm all in your business already. Like we're best friends. Yeah, I'm into it. But that actually doesn't work for everyone. Like for some people, that can really be like, no, it doesn't. And learning to pitch in different ways to accommodate your audience is actually a big developmental mentoring thing, because you can't always throw your fastball if some people just and to drive the result.
You tried a fastball on me once. No.
Well, no.
But honestly, it's also when you start talking to people and you become friendly, ask them for who their friends are. I was, or at least I don't know, I went to, at the time it was Jason De La Roca, and I'm like, give me 10 names, of people to go after. To ask for money, and so he did, and that was, he didn't make those calls for me, but I still had to go through. But it was at least having a name or an email address and that kind of thing. If they won't do an intro for you, just get the name of someone. And I have to be honest with you, when I started in game development, I cold called because I didn't know anything about game development, and I would cold call presidents of game studios. Josh Resnick actually answered my call, and he became my friend, and he helped me, and he introduced me to games. People are willing to do things if you have a good story. They're willing to open up their hearts to you, and I think we have a really good industry that is open to listening. Yeah, we could do better with giving more money away, but when you look at how many trillions of dollars.
I got into games by cold call, so I'm there with you.
Nobody calls anyone anymore.
Nowadays, a little intrusive. So.
I text. no, but
Cold text, cold tweet. What are you doing now? Cold Insta, DMs.
But
LinkedIn.
seriously, but then, don't you ever, DM someone because you want to talk to them about
you don't know their
something
email
you
address,
don't
yes.
already know them?
Yeah.
So you're like, like I once tried to get to Neil Gaiman, with direct
Yeah, DMs.
message. I
Nice.
wanted him for the keynote, So I DM'd him. He ignored me, but it was okay.
His loss.
I got something
Other
better
questions?
this year.
Anybody
Sorry.
else?
Long answer. Great question.
No.
Nobody else wants to know it?
Then all of you should just be writing down the info. Like real talk. Like you just doesn't matter what happens in this 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Like someone up here can help you.
Thank you so much for sharing about the work you do. It's really exciting. I had a question about kind of diversity of actors, and as more kind of non-traditional actors, like nonprofit organizations who aren't in the gaming industry, look at games as a tool for social change. What sort of advice do you have for those organizations, or stay away from this for sure?
Hire real game developers.
That.
I'm gonna ask for more specificity. Like what do you like? Remove the code. What do you mean specifically?
Just for folks who are kind of like organizations that are new to this space and are
Okay.
looking to kind of understand it better.
We just asked you this question, didn't we?
Yeah, so the IGDA has different special interest groups that are involved in different parts of this. So there's a learning, education, and games group. There's diversity SIGs. There's there are different parts of the industry that specialize in different aspects. So obviously, right here is maybe the best possible place to meet game developers who are interested in social change or in education. There's the Serious Play Conference as well, which I probably, Susanna will hit me for mentioning them. But there are a few other events. But Susan's point about if you want to have real impact, then you need to make a real game. And so when you look at like some of the studies that were done early about the impact of games, where somebody made something that was basically a math facts quiz, but with pretty pictures on it, and they said, oh, you know what, games don't actually help learning. Well, right, because you had a crappy game, and right, and it wasn't necessarily the fault of the researcher either. Like they were doing what they could build themselves because that's all they had the money to do. But you've got to engage. If you're going to use games for something, make sure that first and foremost it's a game, and then you can build in the mission and the social aspects of it.
And go to GDC.
Yep.
There's 30,000 game developers at GDC, and they're segmented. They have SIG groups where you can go and join a discussion on one particular topic. We used to do Serious Games Summit, that went away, but there's an education summit, and there's just so many people out there looking for work, looking for new careers, looking to do something else. It's really, honestly, even if you just got an expo pass, it's the place to go and meet everyone.
And if you're really at that super beginning stage of I don't know if my organization would even consider this, email me or somebody else up here possibly, but and I will go and talk to the leaders of any organization who wanted to say, well, is games the right thing for this? And sometimes the answer is, oh hell no, do not. This is not a topic that you want to get into, or no, I'm sorry, you have $5,000 for your budget. There's literally nothing.
I would also go to Global Game Jam. I think there's like no substitute for that experience of seeing what it takes for something to go from start to finish.
Yep.
If you have no exposure, it's the lowest cost of time and energy to go for a weekend and be like,
Yep.
I'm totally committed. I just want to be more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then you
Like
can
more
go
than zero.
represent it to better.
Yeah.
Better.
like-
But I can tell you, I was working a few years back with the federal government, and this was, I kept saying to them, I'm tired of you going to library software companies to ask them to make games for you. Go to a game developer. It is like the hardest thing to break through because everybody says they can make a game, You know, my sister can make a game. You don't want her making a game for you. You know, you want someone who understands the mechanics, who understands the hooks, that's going to be able to bring in the player to give that to whatever you're trying to disseminate, have them have that experience. So that's really the most, I mean, if you can do anything at all while you're here, is like find out who's doing games for organizations like yours and meet them. And they're probably looking for future work.
My name's Kristen. Thanks for your talk. Amazing. I think that I was wondering if you know or you work with specific like manufacturers of games that use like more sustainable methods of creating the medium for which like games are created. For example, like cards or boxes and things like all those different things. Are those
So for physical games,
Yeah, for
it's
physical
sustainable.
games.
Like, none of us really
Manufacturing.
do that.
It's a great question.
Like, I mean, it's a really interesting question, but like for us, people make prototypes, you know. So there's really no waste or environmental thing. You don't manufacture. None of us manufacture anything. So yeah, that's really important. But ever since digital downloads came about, that's changed a lot of, you know, the waste in our industry.
And now it's streaming.
And now
We're not even
streaming,
boxing
you know,
anymore.
like there's, I mean, yeah, I guess there's still GameStop with a box somewhere, but you know, it's so little in proportion to what sales are.
Well, and there has been a huge revitalization in the board gaming community,
Yeah.
and new board games and D&D 5th edition, which is, you know, amazing. So there has been a lot of interest in that area, but it's not one that any of us have kind of worked in. I saw another hand
No.
Anybody else?
somewhere. Yes, sir?
Those topics that you would say, stay away from, hell no.
Oh,
Wait, what did you ask? Wait, I don't understand. What was the question?
What topics?
What
Topics of
what like nonprofit topics are not appropriate for games?
Wait, I don't understand the question still. I don't understand. Actually, rephrase your question. I don't understand your question.
But you said we could pitch you topics about different things and you would say, oh, hell no.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that,
Non-gaming.
like what social issues would you not want to make games around? And actually, I'm not sure there are any that like you shouldn't. Like you would just, I think how you would choose to approach them needs to be very careful, right?
Okay.
And there are some who would just say, "Homo, don't get."
Gordon still doesn't understand the question.
Well, well, no, here, I mean, like, well, so as an art form, you hope people can express themselves across however they want to express themselves.
Yeah,
and
but I
then
think we're talking about non-game specific, maybe like a
Give me an
serious
example.
game types, like the military or.
Are there
I don't
topics
know.
that we would avoid,
Porn.
want to avoid entirely? I mean,
So,
there's ethical
I mean, I'm not-
considerations. We wouldn't want to promote certain things, right? But if in
Like
terms of
hate.
you ask what are our values?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Everyone's got a
the-
compass, just like you have a compass.
Yeah.
And if it's not on your compass, not on your compass. That's cool.
I set up the question,
Yeah,
but
he's-
You're still a designated.
it was more of a.
We know where it's going.
I do often get asked, "Hey, should we make a game for this thing?"
Slap.
And then my question back is always, "What is the outcome you want to see?" Right? And if the outcome that they want to see is not something that a game could provide, well, wouldn't you be better served doing something else? Right? That's more where that comes from.
How do you measure your success?
Why are you looking at
We
me?
have
That was good. I like.
Feedback from the people who participate. You know, people who have either gotten a scholarship, for me anyway, this is how I do it, and write back. We have a Facebook group, and they write back, and they're like, "Oh, I got a speaking slot," or "I got this," you know. And so the excitement and the progression of their careers is something that gives me reward.
For me, it's like if I'm at 1 year, I remember this so, I mean, it made me cry. So 3 people come running up to me and they're like, "Are you Susan Gold?" And I got scared, like, "Are you going to serve me? Like, what is this?" And I go, "Yeah." And they said, I participated in the Global Game Jam, and I met my partner that I started a new game studio with, and we just moved to Los Angeles, and like they told me this whole story, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. And I walked a little further, and someone said, hey, Susan, and I turn around, don't know them, and they're like, you know what? I participated in the Global Game Jam, and I met my boyfriend there, and we're getting married, and I mean, like, it was like this whole afternoon of, oh my God, really? And so I felt like a mom that was so proud, you know? I was like crying, you know? I was just like, this is the most amazing thing. And so like I tried to tell my father, and he just did not get it at all. I'm like, they came to me and they found their boyfriend, and I'm like, oh. But subsequently, just so you know, there have been Global Game Jam babies. Chelsea Howe just had her baby, and she met her boyfriend at the Global Game Jam. I mean, so there's a lot of positive stuff, and we have our Facebook pages, and people share stories. We share stories at the GDC Roundtable. I think it's really important to share those stories, and I think people really respond. I know one year on Facebook I did a birthday fundraiser, and people were totally like on board. People that would have never given me a gift ever gave money to the Global Game Jam. So I was like, oh, must be okay.
Yeah, I think there's metrics like, I mean, there's metrics like in the Facebook sense of engagement, like tangible metrics. There's money, like cold hard
When
cash.
the money comes back.
Yes, there is, if you in your mind, there are narratives, right? So in my mind, there's a narrative of companies I see spending
Go. We're running out of time.
a lot of money in other places. Are they spending money with us, right? Are we of value the same way that other things are of value? And then there's narrative journeys like that where I'm like, I love it when there are young queer or ally people who don't remember before we had parties, right? Who don't remember before there were scholarships to go with, and they're like, oh, what do you mean there's always been? And I'm all like, boo-hoo-hoo, yeah, there's always been, right? Like those journeys and them being able to share it with others, like you were talking about, like telling other people to apply, right? Or when I see them, like Luke from AIAS Foundation was an IDEA scholar. So when I see like Luke go from that journey of discovered, AI scholar to AIAS Foundation, I'm all like, yes, like narrative journeys that are happening, in our work.
I mean, when you run a nonprofit, you're not in it for the money.
Yeah.
You're in it for the results of your hard work. So that's usually our metric. Obviously, when money comes back, but when we see people succeed, is
Yeah, for sure.
You can look at it. How many dollars have I given away? How many lives have I impacted? How many success stories have we gotten back out of it? Whatever success is for them, and those are all amazing.
The Cuban guy, that's a success story.
The Cuban guy, but I have an even better story. But the Tierra del Fuego, is that
Tierra del Fuego?
the furthest south?
The ones having power after they power ends, they survive.
So anyway, this guy told me that people there have the highest rate of suicide in all of Argentina, and that he had all he wanted to do was to leave that place. And they did a global game jam there, and he found other people that were interested in games, and all of a sudden it created a whole path for him. And he said it changed his life, that he was no longer like this suicidal kid. And to me, that just made me cry, that we could have that profound effect on someone's life. And I think all of us hope that everything we do, from the time when Gordon wasn't able to be out, and the fact that he laid down this entire path for thousands of people to now pridefully march, they can do things. I tell my students, I love this industry because you can be a 7-foot tattooed mohawk dress-wearing person and still work.
You just can't be really old.
Yeah, you can't be really old like that. Sorry.
Wow.
On that note.
Truth bomb. Truth serum
haven't broken the
served
ageism
on the
issue.
rocks.
We are out of time.